but slightly over. And that is to welcome you to the third of 4 forums. There'll be one more tomorrow night that will feature the mayor and town council people. And right now we're going to move to the contested race for House District 22. The candidates will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves, make an opening statement. There will be questions from our questioning panel over here, and they also will take those questions again. You can write out on 3x5 cards, which will be run up here, or you'll have a chance to come up to the mic and ask a question. And we have, for a little bit more interactive, we have our penalty flag here. They each have one right now. We might actually give them another one, but as they are giving their answers, if they recognize something that they really want to elaborate on, or they have a very different opinion about, they can raise this card and they'll have 1 minute to interject what they'd like to say. And with that, I believe we would, are there any questions at all? And so they have 90 seconds. Actually, I need to tell you that too. They have 90 seconds to answer the questions. And at the end of the questioning, which will be basically at 7 o'clock, there will be an opportunity for them to give a closing one minute statement. And I also would like to thank Sava, our videographer. All of these forums are available on the Teton County Library website. And I hope that if you know others that miss them, that you'll let them know that. So, first question.
Or do they do an opening?
Oh, I'm sorry. Introductions. Obviously, I need a little more practice. So you each have 90 seconds to introduce yourself. We'll begin with Marti Halverson, the current Republican incumbent in the seat.
Thank you, Sandy. Hello? Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Melissa and Rebecca. Nice to see you again. And thank you for the league for putting this on. Very well done, always. Really appreciate the work you put into this. I am the incumbent. I am a Republican. I am a common sense conservative with a libertarian streak. I'm conservative on fiscal and social issues and libertarian on criminal justice issues, but always 13 generations of Connecticut Yankee common sense prevails. I'm passionate about the over-criminalization that has swept the country and this state, and I'm committed to bringing common sense to the question exactly what is criminal and what should more appropriately belong in the civil realm. This question is becoming crucial as Wyoming's courts and prison systems become financially strapped. Among the core values I bring to this office, my #1 value is the respect for private property. The value of any government, municipal, county, or state, has for our private property reflects their respect for the rest of our rights. Thank you very much.
And our Democratic challenger, Marylee White.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, League of Women Voters, and all of the other co-sponsors of this event. Thanks very much. We're kind of this fringe district, a little bit of Teton County, a little bit of Sublette, a little bit of Lincoln County, and so we're kind of a little bit of nothing, really, in the end. It seems, it feels sometimes. But my name's Marylee White, and I am a 4th-generation Wyomingite. And you might not think of that as a trait that qualifies me to run for the Wyoming House of Representatives. But what it does do is I've lived all over the state, and I have relatives and friends in almost every town. It gives me a way to connect with other legislators and build the ever so important relationships that are needed to get the job done in Cheyenne. I have lived in Jackson Hole now for 33 years. For 16 years, I've been a nonprofit director. Through my experience, I've learned how to envision an objective and I've figured out how to problem solve and get it done. I am married to Charlie Thomas. He's a furniture maker, and his work is on display at Sandy's podium and throughout the library. We have 2 children, and I'm very excited to think about the possibility of going to Jackson Hole, going to Cheyenne, and working for the people of this state that I love.
Thank you both. Now, our first media question.
Great. And does it go to Marylee first?
Yes.
All right. If elected, what would be your #1 priority and how would you get it done?
The transfer of federal public lands is definitely the issue that compelled me to run for office. I have many objections to it, but mainly everyone I know lives in Wyoming because of the opportunities that being in the mountains provide us. And it's not just for hunting and fishing, but also on a spiritual level as well. I think the mountains define who we are in Wyoming, and the BLM lands, the open spaces, they're just all really important to us. How would I get it done is I think I understand the issue very well, and I'm just concerned that, first of all, I don't think there's a constitutional basis for a transfer of federal lands, although now a legislative committee is looking at amending the Constitution. I think that will be really an interesting debate. And what they are looking to do is take out the language that really makes it clear that these lands are not our lands to take. They belong to everybody in the country, and that we gave up ownership of those lands upon statehood. Thank you very much.
Same question?
Yes.
Thank you. My #1 priority is money. We just got a Craig report, and that's the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. Comes out 2 or 3 times a year. The October report just came out on Monday. Naturally, the Craig report tells us that we are facing a severe revenue shortfall. And the number you hear bandied about is $156 million deficit. However, that number is only a forecasting checkpoint. That's how much they were off from their January estimate. We are facing, in actual dollars, a deficit of $500 million, $466 million this biennium. The federal government's coal lease moratorium, the BLM's refusal to permit new energy development, the 80% reduction in timber sales, and the Leave It in the Ground movement will have dire consequences for our schools, our courts, our pension obligations, and the budgets of our cities, towns, and counties. If Wyoming is going to maintain the government it has built, the alternatives to energy developed revenues are increase of the sales tax, the property tax, perhaps an income tax or a corporate tax, none of which are conducive to bringing diversity to our economy. Thank you.
Marylee?
Here, the microphone.
My understanding is, according to an article that quoted our Governor Matt Mead just yesterday, we do have an additional $156 million deficit, but many of a part of that are funds that are going to be swept into savings, and that the legislature can do something about that so that they don't have to go there. And that leaves $52 million additional to cut this budget period. He is suggesting that we use funds from the rainy day account, which now has $1.5 billion in it, to smooth that landing until we can assess how severe the cuts actually are going to play out that have already been made. And I would definitely support the governor in using those rainy day funds for that purpose, just to make so that we really know what we're doing as we continue to cut the budget.
Marty, do you have a follow-up question?
I'll take,
Okay,
how much?
30 seconds.
Okay. Is that right? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Because we're out of,
First of all, the comment starts with a false premise. That's the $156 million. That money is only the money that the forecasters were off since their January projections. The actual deficit is $466 million over the rest of the biennium. We have got to do some severe cutting or do some severe restraint in using our rainy day fund. At the rate we are spending it, it will be gone in 4 years.
okay, thank you both. Do we have any audience questions yet?
We don't have a card, but if anyone would like to step up to the mic, they're welcome to at this moment.
Would anybody like to step up to the mic with an audience question?
No question about the budget deficit. I happen to sit on a legislative subcommittee in the social service area, and what I'm seeing for cuts is cuts across the board. So the places that are effective and efficient are getting cut the same way that places that are inefficient. How would you change that?
Okay, and that question would go to Marty first.
Thank you, Lou, and you're absolutely right. Our drug courts are being cut. Our mental health and substance abuse programs are being cut. And these are all the result of the governor's instructions over the summer, over the interim, when he instituted across-the-board cuts without doing any prioritizing. And this is what I think leadership at the top lacks. They refuse to sit down and say, no, this program is important to me. I'm going to keep it intact. This program is less important to me. I'm going to eliminate that one. Instead, it's across the board. That does not show leadership. One of my priorities will be to restore the $98 million that the governor took out of the Department of Health. I think that's a bad priority. There's many other things that we could cut, like, I'm going to be referring to this throughout the evening, the $7 million garage that's being built for state government. And that's a program, that's an expenditure that could have funded the family learning programs, could have fully funded the low-income senior citizen property tax relief program. As a matter of fact, I would go back and repeal Senate File 41, a $400+ million construction bill, and put that money, number one, back into the Department of Health to meet the healthcare needs of our communities.
I agree that if we cut further, that the cuts should be prioritized. The governor did ask the department heads to decide which cuts would least affect their departments. And those cuts were made across the board. I believe they were 8% for everybody. I also would like to see Medicaid expansion happen in the next session. That'll bring a significant amount of revenue into exactly those areas that Marty is concerned about. Expanding Medicaid has the potential of bringing $168 million a year, $268 million in the biennial. And it'll be spent in hospitals, nursing homes, doctor offices, and mental health centers. I also think that using the rainy day fund, as I said earlier, is a good alternative to continuing to cut until we understand what impact those cuts really have had on the people of Wyoming.
Okay, thank you both. I want to make just a little adjustment here. Marylee, I gave Marty an extra 30 seconds for follow-up, and you're out of your penalty flags. So if you have a follow-up at some point, just give me a flag and we'll give you 30 seconds. I was going to ask for clarification. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I may do a little bit more of that because we're not getting a lot of audience questions yet. If that starts rolling in, it might change. Rebecca?
Speaking of healthcare, Wyoming has many uninsured individuals who may seek healthcare from the ER as a last resort. Who pays for that, and is that an effective way to provide healthcare to the uninsured?
You're looking at me.
I guess it
Yes.
starts with you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You're next.
Indeed, expanding once again, Medicaid would provide health care to a projected 20,000 Wyomingites currently in a coverage gap. They do not qualify for insurance on in the healthcare exchange because they make too little money. And Medicaid, current Medicaid, is categorical. So a lot of people in this, even though they're very poor, even at 100% of the federal income, of the federal poverty level, they still don't qualify for any kind of insurance. So we have a lot of uninsured people who would then receive benefits, and as I said before, that would be spent in a way that would bolster our economy and stabilize services across Wyoming. I've lost the original question, please.
Is that if the uninsured individuals are relying on ERs for
Right.
treatment, who's ultimately paying for the cost of providing that service? And then, I think you've mentioned that you'd use Medicaid to help offset that, but.
Yes, and who is paying right now, more than likely, are all the rest of us who do have insurance, because the hospitals can't go belly up. They have to cover those costs somehow, and more than likely, they charge the rest of us more.
The emergency room use is not going down in Medicaid expansion states. Emergency room in Medicaid expansion states is going up. And here's the reason why. In expanded Medicaid states, provider payments have been cut, have been slashed. Providers, individual healthcare providers, are no longer taking Medicaid patients. So often their resort is, again, the emergency room. You cannot keep Medicaid stable, keep the providers providing service at above their cost, and expect emergency room use to go down. In every state where Medicaid has been expanded, charity care costs are going up. They're going up because people cannot meet their huge copays and deductibles under the Affordable Care Act. Emergency room use is going up, not down, as more and more providers refuse to work for less than their cost and stop seeing Medicaid patients. So they're right back at the emergency room door again. Who pays for that? You're right, everybody else pays for that. But this is the system that the federal government has gotten us into when it decided to get into the wholesale healthcare delivery system.
Follow up?
Yeah, I'd
Rebecca?
like to follow up and just say, okay, and it starts with Marty. What would your solution be for that between 17 to 20,000 estimated people that are uninsured? How do they get health care, and how do we pay for it?
Okay, two things. Number one, the newest projection, and this is from the president of the Wyoming Hospital Association, is now 28,000 potential new enrollees. You add that to the almost 100,000 currently on Medicaid, and we're going to have 25% of our state on Medicaid.
So my question is, how do they access health care?
Okay, everybody gets health care. We have something called EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. Anybody goes to an emergency room and gets health care. Nobody gets turned away at the emergency room, which is why it's a revolving door. Everybody gets health care. If in getting your health care you find yourself impoverished, you can get onto old Medicaid retroactively. And I know that because I was on the board of the Star Valley Medical Center for 8 years, and often we would be presented with a dire circumstance for an individual, and we could get them enrolled retroactively on Medicaid. It's a tedious process, but then the hospital does get paid. But let's not confuse health care with health insurance. Everybody gets health care under federal law.
Rebecca, did you have any follow-up for Marylee?
I think I'd just let Marylee. Yeah.
So based on census figures, the highest possible enrollment numbers in Medicaid would be 41,000. This is a highly unlikely scenario. Currently, 64,000 Wyomingites receive Medicaid. With the maximum, 40,000 unlikely scenario, the total Medicaid population would be 17% of the total population, not 25%. If you go with the likely estimate of 20,000, the total Medicaid population would be 10%. So that is a little bit of an exaggeration there. And then
I was just wondering if you had a proposal for how to have a more affordable delivery of healthcare than the ER for uninsured, that this, as a state legislature, you could help move forward.
Yes, I definitely providing health insurance and opportunity for health insurance to the current 20,000 people too poor to receive insurance would be a really good way to go.
Okay, Melissa, do you have any?
I do. I have a
Okay.
question. Do you believe in the prosecution of the Forest Service employees that aided in the demolition of the Lander Cutoff Trail?
Marty.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, I do. What they did was illegal. Number one, just starting with the non-consultation with the 1976 FLPMA, Federal Land Management and Policy Act. That act calls for consultation, coordination with the county commissioners. None of that was done. And this would not have been discovered unless two private citizens happened to be out there and caught them in the act. These were, and the term in the U.S. Forest Service is obliterated. They obliterated 7 segments of an historic trail illegally. I've been told not to use the word maliciously, but darn it, I think it was malicious because they don't want the trails in the forest used. It got back to the district ranger who denied knowing anything about it. The district ranger is a terrific fellow. We all know him. We have the utmost faith in his response that he did not know. This was done behind his back without consultation or notice to the county commissioners. This was all illegal. Numerous laws have been broken, and I think they should be prosecuted. And just ask yourself, if any one of you or I had gone out and done the same thing, we'd be calling you for bail money right now.
I find the drama around this situation somewhat overblown. I talked to the Forest Service to find out a little bit more information other than hearsay about what happened. I was told that they immediately apologized, that they were incredibly regretful, that they had made this horrible mistake of accidentally covering up a portion of this historic Mormon settlement trail. They sent their supervisor to talk with the county commissioners, and they immediately brought in representatives from SHPO, the State Office of Historic Preservation. They plan to now bring in people from the community who actually know where that trail went. The original ruts from the trail have been obliterated over time. They no longer exist. And they want to more clearly mark the trail and make reparations. I definitely do not think that the federal employees should be prosecuted. I wonder how many of us have not made serious mistakes in the course of carrying out our jobs.
With a backhoe?
Would anybody from the audience, okay, do you want? All right, would you like to use the mic, or do you want to, okay.
Okay. I have a question, and that is...
Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself and make sure it's a question.
Okay. My name is Nancy Fox, and I have a quick question, and that is that given the state budget, and we know where we are and that it's not looking good in the near future, and given the October 24th report that I believe was asked by the legislature to do on the very high costs of actually transferring public land to the state, of what it would cost to do fire management and resource management, would you at this point in time support pursuing that actual transfer of public lands to state and continuing with that, or do you support that? Thank you.
Marylee, you're the first one up. But I'm not sure, Nancy, were you here? Have you been here the whole time?
I think I walked in at the very best.
Okay, because we did ask them to maybe a week.
I'll just say again that I'm very much against the transfer of federal public lands to the state of Wyoming. And I do believe that if the federal lands are transferred, that we certainly cannot afford them. I agree with you on that. Fire control alone is beyond the scope of the Wyoming budget. Also, the state of Wyoming is required by its constitution to balance its budget, and I can imagine that when times get tough and we have very few options for balancing our budget, that I am 100% convinced that they will be sold, and there goes our legacy.
Thank you, Nancy. The report was not on the transfer. The report was on the management of the land. And it's an important distinction because management would come with it all the U.S. federal laws, rules, regulations that follow federal lands. No, Wyoming cannot afford to manage the lands under the burdens placed on us by the government in Washington, D.C. But your question, I think, does go to transfer. And yes, I support the transfer of the public lands. And very briefly, I'll just go down a list. You see me later, or I'll send you some more information. The federal government legally must transfer the public lands to the states. Wyoming can afford it. A University of Wyoming economist in 2014 did a study showing that, yes, we can afford to own the lands. The state will not sell the public lands. The only entity that benefits from the sale of public lands is the federal government. According to our act of admission, they get 95% of the proceeds of any sales, and our school foundation gets 5%. The only entity motivated to sell is the federal government, not the state.
Okay, Rebecca. Do you have another
Staying on
question?
the topic of lands, I'm talking about the school trust lands, which the state has trust lands that it needs to make money from to support schools, and right now is looking to sell some state trust parcels in Grand Teton National Park to the federal government. There's a fundraising campaign to help fund that sale from the state to the federal government in the national park, and I would just like to hear each of your position on whether you're supportive of that transaction.
Marty, you're next up.
Yes, I support the sale of the state trust lands to the Department of the Interior. I voted aye on that bill when it did come before us in the House. Now, due to our constitutional provision that there shall be no net loss of state lands, the state will sell that 1,380 acres, and they'll have to acquire 1,380 acres somewhere else. Hopefully a parcel that will make the state more money than the $1,800 they get off of grazing fees on it now. The state government cannot go into deficit as far as the acreage owned by the state goes. As of October 2015, the state was in net deficit of 1,500 acres, and they were scrambling to make it up, looking for it elsewhere in the state. Since statehood, the state has sold or swapped land parcels, but over all these decades, we were only in deficit 1,500 acres. And the parcels that are going to be sold to the state, sold to the Department of the Interior, hopefully the National Park Service, will have to be made up elsewhere. It was a Democratic governor who put those parcels up on the auction block to the highest bidder. But it was a brilliant tactic because it brought the Department of the Interior back to the negotiating table.
I definitely would support the transfer, and I look forward to completing that transfer and preserving that land close to Grand Teton National Park. I think it's essential, and I can't wait until it happens.
Okay, as moderator, I'd like to just switch topics here for a minute. And I'm going to ask a question that came from the general public. Over the past several Wyoming legislative sessions, bills regarding women's reproductive health care have been introduced. Do you support the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision? Why or why not? And Marylee, I think that you would be the first one up.
I would not vote in favor of weakening any of Wyoming's abortion laws. And I am a strong supporter of Roe v. Wade, which has been the law of the land for 43 years now.
When Roe v. Wade was settled in 1973, just go back and read the opinion. It said that a woman has a right to choose in the first trimester. Look where we have come since then. We have got presidential candidates talking about partial birth abortions. What we have in this country now is nothing that those justices envisioned in 1973. Where do you draw the line? And in my several terms, in the 2 terms in the House, I have seen a ultrasound bill, and by golly, I can't remember if there was another one. There was one bill that said An abortion provider may ask a woman if she wants to see the ultrasound. The ultrasound is done for the dating of the fetus. And that didn't make it out of committee. I don't recall that there was another one in there, but the ultrasound bill did not get out of committee. So on the subject of abortion, I am personally pro-life. I know that's what you all want to hear. I am personally pro-life. But look from 1973 to the present, what this Supreme Court ruling has wrought.
Okay, let's see, I think we're back to, actually, Jessica, do you want to come up to the mic?
Hi, Jessica Chambers. My question is more of a philosophical one. Where do you draw the line, to borrow your terminology, Representative Halverson, between human rights and property rights? Because in Wyoming, a lot of people talk about property rights, and I want to know, for you, where do human rights trump or supersede property rights?
Well, I would say your property rights stop when you interfere with your neighbor's rights. But I guess I'm confused about human rights. Can she clarify that for me?
Can you clarify that?
I mean, what did you have in mind?
Well, there are certain principles that are considered to be human rights, like access to health care, for instance, which you touched upon earlier. And so at what point does, it's a hard concept to try and explain in a short period of time, at what point do the necessary services or pieces as basic needs of people come before the rights of people who own property? Does that make sense?
Oh,
So at what point does, trying to take care of people that live in poverty come before taking care of people that own property or something to that degree? I'm doing my best here. It's a very philosophical question.
Judging from the audience reaction, this is just not. Can you maybe give me an example? Give us an example.
Okay, locally in our local election, we have a housing issue.
Yes.
And people talk about infringing upon people's property rights by making regulations or allowing people to build 4 stories. But we also have people that are homeless in town and that are losing their houses. So at what point do you say it's more important to take care of the people that work here and are losing their homes before you take care of the people's right to have, a say of what happens in their neighborhood? That's the best I can do.
Okay, let me try to address this. Let's just take the accessory units. And now I don't live in Jackson, I don't live in Teton County, I have no vote. So let's just say we had a similar problem in Alpine. To tell the residents of Alpine that they cannot build a mother-in-law suite over their garage is wrong. That is a violation of property rights. To tell the residents of Alpine that they can build an accessory unit to house a homeless person is also a violation of the property right. So if I'm trying desperately to go with you here. Okay. The homeless person generally does not have a right, and I'll personalize it, to my property. In England, they have a bedroom tax. If you have an unused bedroom in your house, you have a choice. You can pay a tax on it, or you can put someone in there. Someone who you might know, you might not know, but out of the goodness of your heart, or because you don't want to pay the tax, you can offer that bedroom to a homeless person. It's an idea that they're doing in England. I don't know if Teton County wants to adopt that, or if we should even consider it.
Thank
But
you. Marty, your time is up. Marylee, you want to take a little crack at that? It was addressed to Marty, but.
But I understand what you're getting at, Jessica, and I'd love to sit down and have a glass of wine with you and, try to figure out how to solve our housing issues in Teton County. I think that there are always solutions, and I think when you bring a lot of heads together and generate a lot of ideas, that you can filter down and eventually get to the right solution for the community. I'm 100% convinced that Teton County is addressing and will continue to address the housing issue. I am seeing a lot of independent action on the issue, and that seems to be a mass migration to Alpine, Wyoming right now. Alpine is facing record growth, and the face of the community is changing. Some issues tend to generate their own solutions, but it does need to be done responsibly with the needs of the community and the needs of the individuals who live here in mind.
Thank you. Melissa?
So this is an audience question, and it's kind of a follow-up to what you guys have been just talking about. Would you support the unused bedroom tax that Marty explained they have in England?
Okay, and so this is specifically for Marty?
I think it's for both of them,
Okay.
but they were referencing what she was just talking about.
okay, well, in England, there is a housing shortage. And what they have done, what they've instituted, is a bedroom tax. If you have a spare bedroom in your house, you have a choice. You will be taxed on it. I don't know if it's a surcharge on your property tax. I don't know if it's by the square foot, but it's called the bedroom tax. What they want to do, they know that there are housing units all over England with unused rooms, and they have a population of homeless people. So someone got the idea to put the homeless people into these unused rooms, and you can opt out of this by paying a tax. As I said, I don't know how it's structured, but it's called the bedroom tax. So you either fill the bedroom with someone, get someone off the street, or you pay a tax.
Do you want to follow up? No, hold on.
Oh, would I support that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I thought you meant explain it. Sorry. No.
Melissa, are you finished with that question?
Do you want to follow up on that?
That's no.
Do you want me to answer it, or-
Yeah, it was for both of you. So you're.
Okay.
Would you support it? Is the question that goes to you.
I don't think we're there right now. Like, I think it would be kind of a very difficult tax to enforce. I think of my house. I happen to have 2 empty bedrooms right now, and we have people who come and go in those bedrooms on a regular basis. We have students who live with us when they do internships at the hospital. We have summer students who live with us in the summer. We just had 3 kids stay with us who came for an architecture conference. I mean, people are in and out of those bedrooms all the time. So am I taxed? I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, Rebecca?
Just following up on the topic of taxes, because there is a ballot initiative to have a 1% general sales tax for transportation and housing here in Teton County. During a debate of that tax, it was brought up that people thought the lodging tax could do more for this community if this community had more flexibility in how they use that lodging tax. The state legislature prescribes how the money would be spent. So I would like to hear both of your opinions on what you and the state legislature could do to, or would support as far as giving more taxing flexibility or authority to local government.
And Marylee, you get to take this one first because we got a little out of order.
I would love to see the lodging tax have more flexibility. I do think it would be a great solution for Teton County. And I think that eventually, at some point, probably this evening, we're going to talk about diversifying the economy in Wyoming. And I would also support exploring the possibility of giving towns and counties more leeway in the taxes that they levy. I think that community development takes place, or economical development is best suited to occur at the local level. And if the towns and counties had a little more flexibility, they could decide themselves, do they want to grow their community and do they need to levy a tax to do that, or would they prefer no taxes? And I'd much rather see it happen at the local level than at the state level.
Ditto. I can't stand the thought of sitting in Cheyenne and crafting legislation or voting for a bill that tells a local county or a local municipality how their money shall be spent. I am knee-jerk opposed to taxes, but I voted for a bill that would have allowed Hot Springs County to put on the ballot, shall we create a hospital district? I don't see how we sit in Cheyenne and say, no, Hot Springs County, you cannot bring that forward in your county. And the way we don't like federal mandates, I can understand the frustration in the counties and the towns and the cities when the mandates come down from Cheyenne, and they do come down from Cheyenne. I will always vote for more local control than less, and less state control and more local control. Who are we to sit in Cheyenne and have legislators from the fine counties of Platte and Weston and Niobrara tell Teton County what they can and cannot do with their revenues?
All right, well, thank you all for those questions. I think that we are out of question time right now, but we'd like to go to closing statements. And Marylee, you're first up.
When it comes to government, we do have to be very careful the decisions that we make. And I think that because I know Wyoming well and understand the values and traditions, that I can make good decisions for the people of Wyoming. And if I were elected to this office, I would always put the people of Wyoming first. Maybe that answers your question, Jessica. But I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak this evening. I think the distinction between me and my opponent are quite clear, but we did agree on a few things. I appreciate that this forum was held and we had a chance to talk about some of the issues a little bit more in depth. And I thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Melissa and Rebecca, for spending a World Series game night. And how are those Cubs doing, by the way? Okay, there was one issue that was not brought up, and I'd like to use my closing statement on it, and it's under the heading of Medicaid expansion. In the Sabilas case, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government may not withhold old Medicaid funding from states that do not expand Medicaid, which, you remember, the Affordable Care Act was crafted to do. However, the court did not address the ability of expansion states to disexpand if the federal government failed to keep its new Medicaid funding promises or for any other reason. Anticipating this question, there have now been several legal analyses that conclude that states may not back out of expansion. There is at least one state that is contemplating this expansion, and many of us are paying close attention to these efforts. Thank you, League of Women Voters, and for everyone who came here tonight.
Let's thank these ladies for their service. And willingness to serve. Now we will have a 10-minute break, switch gears.